Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a story that I want to share with you. So this is a narration of that story that was sent to me by one of our dear listeners. The narration of that story, it reads like this. Hello, how are you, my brother? Can you please post my own story as hidden identity? My brother, there is one thing that my mother did a very long time ago that I can't even understand up until today. Whenever I think about this story, I keep on asking myself if my mother is a witch, if my mother is a ritualist, if my mother used all of her brothers. Because my mother, when she was born in a family of all boys and she was the only girl. And then after my mother had gone to visit a traditional healer, that was when all of my mother's brothers, my uncles, they all passed away one by one. And I suspect that my mother, she is the one who bewitched them. And when we were growing up, my mother's family, the family in which she was born into, it was a family which was really united, but I don't know where it all went wrong. I don't know if it was jealousy or if my mother has the spirit of witchcraft living inside her body. I do not have the courage yet, but I keep on telling myself that one day when I return back home, the thing that I want to ask my mom is, did you bewitch all of your brothers, or did you use them for some rituals? So what happened when I was still young was that one night my mother told me that she wanted me to accompany her to Chipinge. So this was like, so I was like, what are we going to do there in Chipinge? But I could not ask my mom that question because I was afraid of her. Well, my brother, we didn't even tell my father exactly where we were going to. We just lied to my father that we were going to my mother's brother. My mother's brother was staying in Mutare, but we never went to his house. We only passed through his house. This was when we were traveling back from the village there in Chipinge, where my mother and I stayed for a couple of days at that traditional healer's house. Well, we traveled from the city, then we went to Chipinge. When we arrived in that village, immediately when we stepped in that old lady's compound, I knew that this was nothing but a traditional healer's compound, because I saw that there were flags of different colors that were being hanged in the air. These flags, they represented that this man was a traditional healer. Well, my brother, when we entered into the compound, then we met this very old lady. This old lady, she was so old, my brother, I don't even know why she was still alive, because it was like she was making people around her to suffer. Each and every night, this old lady, what they would do is that when she would go to bed, they would then start rubbing some cow dung on her back, because she was cracking up, like her skin was now cracking on her back. So they would rub cow dung so as to keep her warm and to make sure that her skin will not crack even further. This happens when you get very old. Your skin on the back, it will start to crack. So this old lady, my brother, even though she was suffering like this, but she was a very powerful traditional healer. Throughout the time when we were staying at this very powerful traditional healer's house, I saw that there was no customer that ever came. Well, it seemed as if my own mother, she was a friend to that old lady's daughter. We stayed at that traditional healer's place, my brother, and it was the most scary time of my life, because each and every night the compound would be hit by lightning. They say that lightning will never strike the same place twice, but this lightning, it was striking this compound over and over again. This is how powerful this lady was. After my mother had been given her charms that she never revealed to me what was the purpose of her being given all of those charms, we then returned back to Mutare, and then we went to visit my uncle, who was my mother's brother. Then when we stayed at my uncle's place, I then found out that my mom, after we had bought this other African rep skirt, and my uncle was mad about it because my mother one day, she had just said to me, let us go to town, and we never informed my uncle or to inform anyone. When we returned back, then my uncle was like, where had you gone to? Then my mother said that she was just walking around, and my uncle was mad at his wife because he thought that she had let his visitors to just walk around without having anyone to accompany them. Well, my brother, what happened was that one night my mother, she took that African rep skirt, then she had this other black cloth. I think it was part of the charms that she was given by that traditional healer. She then started sewing that African rep cloth with that black cloth that she had been given by that traditional healer. And when I tried to ask her what she was doing exactly, she then slapped me so hard. She wanted me to remain quiet. When we returned back to the city, that was when we received the sad news that my uncle had passed away. My uncle just suffered from a small sickness for only a couple of days. Then my uncle just passed away. But the thing that I started to notice, the weird behavior that my mother was now doing, was that she always had this African rep skirt on her body at all the times, and whenever she would remove that rep skirt, then someone in her family will die. My brother, she wore this African rep skirt throughout until all of her brothers had actually passed away. The day that my mother stopped wearing this African rep skirt, it was the day that her last brother passed away. From the day that she bought this African rep skirt, she never washed it. It even reached a point whereby it was really smelly. And anyone that knew my mother was someone who was a smart lady, who always wore clothes that were smart at all the times. But there was something different about that African rep skirt that she bought when we had returned from visiting that very powerful traditional healer that was quite old. My mother always wore this African rep skirt without ever washing it. So when her brother, the last one who was still remaining, when she was told that he was very sick, my mother said something that truly shocked me, because when someone is sick, we all expect that you must take your relative to the hospital. But my mother then gave a sister-in-law who was my uncle's wife, and she said that if you take him to the hospital, she is going to die. It was as if my uncle going to the hospital, the oath that my mother had taken was that if anyone that she would have bewitched will go to the hospital, then that person will just die. She gave this warning to her sister-in-law, and she said that if you are going to take your husband to the hospital, know for a fact that she is going to die. Well, my uncle's wife, she was a bit confused. She didn't know what to do anymore. But her neighbors, when they found out that her husband was sick like this, because he was even struggling to breathe, it was like there was something that was actually blocking her. Then they took a car that they hired. Then they carried my uncle to the hospital. Just when he was admitted into the hospital, that was when my uncle passed away. Just like my mother, he had given them a warning, and when she said that if you take him to the hospital, surely he is going to die. Well, after my uncle had passed away, we then went to the funeral. When we went to the funeral, upon our return, after we had buried our uncle, that was when I saw my mother taking off her African rep skirt, that same one that she had been wearing all this time, that same African rep skirt that she had never washed, as smelly as it was. And she started washing this African rep skirt. From that day, my brother, she never wore it again. So right now, what I am planning is that the next time that I am going home, I want to sit down with my mother so that I can ask her so many questions that I have in my mind that needs answers, so that I can get closure. I want to know what actually happened to all of my uncles, the way that they passed away. They just started dying soon after we had gone to visit that traditional healer, when we did these things in secret. Yo, dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by one of our dear sisters. So that one was a narration of that message that was sent to me.